Welcome back to episode 2 of the AOM podcast. That's the Art of Movement podcast. I'm Dr. Paul Carone. I like to use movement to make sure that your chronic aches and pains go away. We're still trying to figure out an intro to the show, so I'm just going to try a different one until one sticks. Today we're doing a Q&A situation. We're going to do 4 questions. One was, how are the left shoulder and right hip connected? Can my right hip be affecting my left shoulder? The next one was, do I need to stretch or strengthen end range of motion first before stretching, or vice versa? The third question we're going to answer today is, someone wanted to know what my personal weaknesses and or chronic injury journeys have been, and I think that's a great question. And lastly, what is the value of the chiropractic adjustment, which might open a can of worms. But we'll get to that in a second. So always helpful to have people ask questions. I'm going to answer them in longer form than I would be able to on other platforms. So please do send me your questions, whether it's on the comments in YouTube and social media, or just message me or email me. That all works really well. So we're going to start with this athlete who asked a question about their right hip and their left shoulder being connected. Yes, they're definitely connected. I'm going to answer this a couple different ways. I'm sure the book Anatomy Trains would say that there's like a literal fascial line that connects the right hip. I think it's the functional front and back lines that actually connect the front and the back of the hips. So imagine someone throwing something. If your right shoulder and your left hip aren't connected, you're not going to be able to throw a football, a baseball, any sort of thing very far. So there's probably literal connections to them too. I'd like to think more zoom out a little bit. If your hip doesn't do anything, imagine, let's just take an extreme. Let's say we have someone who's paralyzed from the waist down and have them try and throw something or use their shoulder as aggressively as they can. There is going to be a lower output in that throw because the hip isn't able to help or stabilize. That data that shows with the tennis players, if they have like a lack of range of motion or strength in their big toe or something like that, crazy that their serve goes down at like 17%. I forget what the data is, but their serve goes down in power a certain percentage because of a lack of power in their big toe. So imagine the hip. The hip and the shoulder or rib cage. The hip and the rib cage are pretty intricately connected. If your hips in general aren't moving well, there's a good chance the rest of your body could be leaving some movement capabilities on the table. I'll give you one example of this. I worked with a jiu-jitsu athlete who had some pretty bad shoulder pain. He said a lot of people have been looking at his shoulder, rotator cuff, used all the traditional words of like banded, external, internal rotations, did all the shoulder stuff. No one looked at his rib cage, but 2, no one checked to see if his hips could move at all. My treatment for that particular individual was to do some, one of the movements was diagonal kettlebell swings, which are very much a hip-shoulder movement. But we worked primarily on his hip range of motion and capability. And I think like after we really started getting to his hips, he goes, holy cow, like my shoulder feels great. And we didn't really work on the shoulder that day. I remember specifically because he felt like it was voodoo. And I thought that just made sense because, if one part of the body doesn't move, the rest of it is not going to move either. So I hope that answers the question of, can my right hip be affecting the shoulder? Yes, it can. And I think we should think about, can that right shoulder be affecting the hip? Yes, to that as well. And usually what's in between those two things, and is that doing its job well? On to the next question, which was, does my joint, if I'm having joint pain or my joint's not feeling great, do I need to stretch or do I need to work on end range of motion strengthening first? And this question kind of threw me for a loop because I don't think it's an either or. I think both of those are good ideas to try and figure out what's going on with their joint. But I would say end range of motion strengthening is stretching. And I think my stretching podcast, funny enough, from last week would be pretty helpful for that. So I would definitely go listen to that. I think with knees over toes guy being pretty prevalent in the industry, in our world of let's go to the maximum range of motion. If you can't get there, we'll regress it a bit and really push ourselves to get to the end every single time. I think that can be useful. But what I also think it does is it pisses off a lot of tendons that aren't really ready for that type of load. Without getting too clinical, because this isn't meant for clinicians really, I would rather, if someone asked me that in my office, like, should I be stretching or should I work end range of motion strengthening? I think both they're the kind of the same thing. So I'd want just a controlled movement through which you feel strong. And after so many reps, you feel like you got a really good pump in the muscle and it didn't piss off the joint at all. I used to be okay with like a 5 or 4 out of 10 pain while working and trying to rehab stuff. I'm trying to get that closer to like a 1 out of 2 or 0. I think 0 is probably a better place to be. So if you are having joint pain and you're wondering whether you should stretch, I don't think stretching gets you any long-term answers. I think loading things in the right way is going to make you much happier long-term and the joint happier long-term. Now, what does loading things in the right way mean? I need to figure out what kind of joint problem is going on first, so I can't answer your question directly, but most of the time when we have joint issues, I just imagine things pulling on the joint, either with one side pulling more than the other, or the joint just being in a position that doesn't allow for the muscles to do their job. And so we talked a little bit about this last week, but imagine again, we're trying to find 2 points, A and B, and those points can move relative to each other. The only issue is there's a muscle connecting both of them. So wherever we move these points, the muscle is going to be affected, and vice versa. So if we use the muscle in between points A and B, the points are going to change. And if we change points A and B, the muscle is going to change. So there's a lot to that question. My answer, without having to be able to explain or without getting to explain anything, would be I would do strengthening first and start loading your tissues, because there's a good chance that if there's a tendon problem or a joint problem, that the loading in a controlled, safe way is going to alleviate a lot of that issue. And if that for a couple of days, weeks, etc., doesn't calm anything down, then we can look at different situations. So I hope that's helpful. My current issue, man, when I got asked this, one, no one asks about my problems, which is really nice. But I do have some problems, and I'm not perfect, and there's usually a lot of shit going on with me. Because I work out a lot and I try to push myself, I want to grow. And with growth, you run into things that stop you from growing. And for me, I have now been dealing with a chronic elbow pain for 2 years. About 2 years, which is crazy to say out loud. And I will tell you exactly why things haven't gotten better. Because I fall into the same traps that you guys do. I fall into the inconsistency trap. I fall into the can I get this fixed in a week and it should be fixed and I'm sick of it, and then fall off the wagon trap. I fall into let's try this new exercise. It didn't work after 2 reps or 2 sets trap. And then I fall into the rest of my life is not really ideal to be healing joints trap, aka my sleep hasn't been good sometimes, or my diet, or this or that, or I'm stressed. All of these things matter, especially when healing really, really grumpy tendons. Grumpy tendons are probably the hardest thing to work on. I often say rest is almost never the answer. And I do stick by that. I don't think for the 99.9% of people that rest is the answer. If you deal with a very true tendinopathy, like a true angry tendon, and you are trying to constantly use it over and over and over again, there's a good chance it won't ever get better. Now, if you just let it rest for 2 to 3 days until it calms down and you hit the rehab right, that's probably the way to approach it. If you have a tendon that gets really angry, you don't do anything for 2 to 3 days, it feels better, you continue not to do anything for 2 to 3 days, and then you jump back into a routine you had been doing and expect it to be better, that's a recipe for either reflaring or further injury. So while I'll stick by my don't use rest as a constant or as a way to get things better permanently. I do think in certain tendon issue situations, you should be able to take a day or two off, let it calm down, and then rehab appropriately on the other end. Doesn't mean you can't be doing other things with your body at that time, but when you are doing something delicate like that kind of rehab, you need to let it chill out. Now, the problem with my elbow is that I use my hands every day. And the elbow problem I have is technically, no, not even technically, it's been coined golfer's elbow. I don't really golf, so I don't know how I got golfer's elbow. But I do, because it's usually associated with this muscle that comes all the way down the forearm and ends up on the inside of the elbow, and it can get overused. And if I would just be able to let that rest for a couple of days and be consistent with my rehab for more than 1 week, and get good sleep, eat well, and de-stress a little bit, I could probably take care of this in a couple weeks' time. The problem is I have just started a business. We are very busy. I'm excited to keep moving. I am an ambitious person, and I want to gain another 20 pounds by summer, which is a silly goal, but that's something on my list that I want to do and see if I can push myself while I have the time. And so this elbow hasn't really gotten to the point where it's limited me, and so I've been okay with maintaining where I'm at. But then I go into these waves of frustration. And so maybe part of the reason I do enjoy working with the chronic pain population so much is that I understand it pretty well. Not only because I've been dealing with this for 2 years, but I've had chronic knee pain and injuries and ACL tears and all of that takes years of rehab. So if that's one thing that I could mention that I think is pretty important, is that rehab. I just saw a post recently, and Dr. Andy Chan up in New York City posted, and he had a lot of great points, but I'll kind of sum them up. The rehab quick fixes don't exist, one. If you go somewhere and you feel better the next day and you think your problems are fixed, one, you probably didn't have a problem, and two, those things will be back if you do have a problem. Rehab, while it is very much focused on the movements, the strengthening, the muscles, the tissues, all of that, involves your whole life. And so just like I was saying, if I'm not getting good sleep, if I'm stressed, if there's other stuff going on, if my mentality is I'll always be injured, the muscular part almost doesn't matter. Most of my partner and I, Dr. Sam Broussard, we talk about this a lot. You know, we don't play psychologists, but we have to be very aware of the type of person and their energy that they bring into a room. We can't be a cheerleader forever. We have to be pretty blunt with most of the people we work with, but we always notice who's going to succeed the quickest or who's going to succeed in the best fashion. And that's difficult because they walk in with a certain energy. It's hard to be upbeat, happy, excited, positive when you've had chronic pain for years. We get that. But there is also a way of, changing your mindset to help with the process, and realizing that this process is probably the goal. I write that on every single one of my welcome packages in my little handwritten note. I say, remember that the process is the goal, and it's not to get out of actually smashing people's rehab and getting them out the door, but it's realizing that from point A to point B, we're starting at point A with chronic pain, and point B is out of pain doing the thing we love. There is almost never a straight line going A to B. It is going to go up, it's going to go down. It might even fall off the graph paper for a second and then come back on. There is so much involved with that. And the best things that we can do are, as our side of things as clinicians, is just make sure that you guys are doing the right things and then support you in any other way that we find would be helpful. Because if we don't keep you guys on track, just like my elbow, it will continue to pop up and flare up. And for us, and for someone like me, that feels like the biggest waste of time ever. You guys invest money and time to go to all these providers to feel better. And if we can't keep you consistent, if we can't keep you engaged, excited enough to make progress and continue towards this goal, which is the process, then you'll be back in the same room in 3 months, and maybe a different room, frustrated even more. So that was a long-winded question of what are my weaknesses and what's my current chronic injury situation. So thank you for that question. But I've got some elbow pain. I have a plan now that I've set into my planner before my workouts to do every day this week. I've been consistent for 3 days in a row now. My diet is dialed in. My sleep is almost dialed in. And I'm feeling pretty great because it's sunny outside. And it's finally going to stay warm, I think. So there's a very good chance I will not have elbow pain in the next month, and we'll have to check in 4 or 5 weeks from now. And so the next question, which is going to probably get me yelled at a little bit, is what is the value of chiropractic adjustments? I'm gonna ramble here, and it's the only way to answer the question for me personally. I am a chiropractor. I'm a rehab chiropractor, whatever that means. I like to use movement to get people better. I used to work at the joint, funny enough, where I adjusted only and would see a bunch of people every day. I only did that for a couple months because it was pretty tough on my body, and I'm pretty sure that's where I got my elbow pain to start with. I think adjusting is useful, and it can be a great tool. Do I think it gets people better by itself? And do I think it does all of the things that the most avid chiropractors and schools teach? Probably not. Now, the same could be said of, the way I do things now. Like, do I think movement gets everything better? No, we just talked about how sleep and the rest of your world and life depends on, is dependent. So I think that could be said for a lot of things, but I think the problem with some chiropractors and some adjustments is that they claim that a lot of things happen. Now, I'm not going to say that those things don't happen. Well, one, I don't think adjusting someone cures cancer or anything like that, so let's just get that off the table. But do I think an adjustment can help with some digestive issues? Yeah, I think maybe that could help with some digestive issues. Is there any strict evidence that says that? Probably not. I don't think I've seen any that says anything like that. But I'm not a strict evidence-based only guy, because I think those people in our current space have really made it difficult to flow with rehab treatment. Now, I use evidence-based stuff for the majority of my rehab, my programming, the way I do things. I've learned from people who have published articles like that. That's not what I'm saying. I think if we go too aggressively to evidence-based stuff, we will miss a giant portion of potential care that people would like to receive. And so if I only go by the book on certain things instead of, hey, how are you feeling today? I think people wouldn't get better as quickly as possible. Back to our chiropractic. What is the value of chiropractic adjustments? In my world, I adjust probably 20%, maybe 25% of the people I see. I use the adjustment personally as a way to relax the person if they find it relaxing. So that's something we'll talk about in a second. So I find it a way to relax the person. I do find it useful to create movement in certain spaces that have not been able to move. So an adjustment is theoretically just creating a bit more movement into a spinal joint. And so if people are really locked up through the thoracic spine, for example, an adjustment through that area would allow them to move better, or just feel what it feels like in that space to have some movement, so that when we go do our exercises, they can actually understand that, oh, I do have some more space here. Oh, that's what that's supposed to feel like. And so for me, I use the chiropractic adjustment along the spine for like a nervous system chill out and a little small boost to proprioception, which just means feeling what it feels like to have a bit more movement. I definitely do use extremity adjustments. And so that would be like, your toes, ankles, knees, wrists, shoulder, although I don't really do much shoulder, ribs technically. Those are very helpful. And I think, again, those provide some brain connection to an area of like, oh, I get to move these things now. This is great. Do I think they are needed with everyone? No. I don't think an adjustment is needed for everyone, and that's just the people I see. I see chronic pain issues, and most of those have movement pattern struggles. So like, I'm not gonna adjust everyone because I think that I like this quote David Gray said, talking about like the nervous system and like the body knows how to heal. If the body knew how to heal, my elbow would be good to go today. You know, like I get frustrated a little bit with that explanation of the chiropractic adjustment side of, hey, the body heals itself, which I do think. I think that's great, and I think we need to give it as much ability to do so with good diet, sleep, and all that. But if we keep doing the same movements and patterns that got us into trouble in the first place, we could let it heal itself, in quotes there for everyone who can't see, in quotes. But if we keep going back and doing the same old thing, then the nervous system, it's just going to fall back into the same pattern. And so the nervous system isn't this all-knowing God of like, let me fix your elbow pain, you've given me the right ingredients. It's just going to keep you alive and moving and doing the things that it does automatically. My high school AP math teacher used to always say to Billy Lewis, shout out Billy Lewis, you know, Billy, new semester, new quarter, whatever, this semester, flip over and you leave same shit on the other side. So I really like that, and that for whatever reason stuck with my 16 or 17-year-old self, because I think people go through surgeries, I think people get cortisone shots, I think they get all these cool dry needling, acupuncture, soft tissue, cupping, you know, scraping done, and they flip over a new leaf, and it's like, wow, this feels great. And then they just start moving exactly the same way. They go back into their sedentary lifestyles, and there's just the same old shit on the other side. And so maybe that's the thing I want you guys to remember. If you flip over a new leaf, just make sure there's not the same old shit on the other side, because that's what matters. You know, we need to make sure we clean up our movement. So there you have it. The hip and the shoulder are connected. Shocking, I know. The knee, if you have a bad joint, I don't necessarily think stretching is going to get you there. I think strengthening, and not necessarily an end of range of motion. I want you to be able to strength train in a way that makes your joint feel good. Let's just start there, and then we can talk about end range stuff. My elbow hurts, but I have a plan. And then lastly, chiropractic adjustments, I'm sure, are great for most people. I don't think they do everything that has been said that they do. I use them to make the person feel good and feel what movement should feel like. And then I make sure to follow that up with movement. And so if you guys enjoyed any of this, I know it's a lot of rambling. I hope my rambling is useful to you. I think there's little golden nuggets in there that you can pick out, but please ask questions. I'd be happy to answer them. And we will see you guys on the next one.